brother of Jesus. That's kind of exciting. So I'll just recap a little bit. Last week we looked at chapter 1. And chapter 1 gave us that introduction to this idea that true faith is something born out by words and action that match that faith, what we believe in. So James introduced that in chapter 1. He was clear when he said, if our actions and our words don't match our beliefs, if they don't match our faith, that is actually not religion. I think the translation, the Message translation last week was it's hot air or something, right? It's just hopeless, it's worthless, it's not real religion. In chapter 2, he gave a little bit more detail about some of the issues that were going on in his little congregations. One of the things that was happening was, remember, these were churches like in homes. They're not a big organization like churches today. And they are supposed to be gatherings of equals, right? Rich and poor, slave and free, everybody coming together. And some of these churches had been making this sort of hierarchical plan that they had going on. And so they would have some wealthy guests come in, and those wealthy folks would be offered the front row seats. And we have a potluck today after worship. Sometimes if they were going to have meals, well, those wealthy folks who could pay big tithes, they would be invited to come and eat first. And those members or those visitors who would come, who happened to be poor, would be invited to sit maybe in the dirt, or maybe to get in the end of the line for their love feast. So James says in chapter 2, no, this is not okay. This can't go on. In fact, it's not worship. If we're admiring some and despising others, that just cancels out our worship of God, the God that we know in Jesus Christ. So that was chapter 2. Now, in chapter 3, which we just heard the biggest portion of, James is returning to this idea of the words that we say. He's getting back to speech. And he says here that it almost sets up this mixed message kind of thing. Because he says essentially, all of us make mistakes, right? None of us is perfect in what we can say. So there's this tendency, I think, when we read something like that to think, well, the next logical thing to say or to think is, so why should I even try? Right? Why should we try? It's okay if we don't have perfect speech. I mean, who could be perfect after all, right? He says not many people are perfect. So if not many people are perfect, and it's so hard to be perfect, and we all fall short, maybe we shouldn't even worry about it. But that is definitely not the conclusion we are meant to draw from the book of James. These are some pretty serious words that Missy just read to us today. No, the conclusions we are supposed to draw are, first of all, not many of us, therefore, should presume to be teachers. Right? We shouldn't necessarily presume to be the teachers and leaders of something that we ourselves either can't or won't practice. So that's the first thing he says. And then he says, while we are in this process of attempting to do something that apparently no one can do, which is taming the tongue, one sure thing is to look at the people who can control their tongues. Look at those perfect people. Someone who can control what they say maybe is a person that we should try to emulate, especially if we are going to maybe think that we could presume to be a teacher. Because a person who can control their tongue, obviously, can then control their whole body. This little teeny tiny thing can control the larger thing. And so he gives us these metaphors. Right? He uses 3 different metaphors. He says the tongue is like a bit in the mouth of a horse. A horse weighs somewhere between 1,000 and some horses weigh over 2,000 pounds. And this tiny little piece of metal in its mouth can direct the horse, right, either into a pit or up the mountain. Just this tiny little thing. Tongue is like that too. The words we say are like that too. And then he compares the tongue to the rudder of a ship. A humongous ship can have this very small little device on the back of it, and that rudder can either take that ship out into the wide expanse of ocean and ride the waves and go to new vistas and have adventures, or that rudder can keep the boat close to the shore, and it could in fact drive the ship directly into the rocks. The same with the tongue. The words we say, like that rudder, well, they could take our family, they could take our church, they could take our communities out into the wide expanse of ocean where exciting things can happen. Or the words we say can take our families, our friends, our neighbors, our church, our communities, crashing onto the rocks. Same sort of thing can happen. And then, my favorite is, he likens the tongue to a spark that can start a fire. The tongue, this tiny little thing, can start a fire. A good fire or a bad fire sometimes. Leona's not here today, but she told me something. She said she ran into an acquaintance recently that she hadn't seen in years. And that person came up to her and said, you know, what you told me 8 years ago or whatever it was, it just changed everything for me. It just made all the difference, and now it's all better. And she was scratching her head like, what did I say? She didn't remember what she said. But what she said was really powerfully important. It changed this guy's life. The words she said. And then this week, when I do research for a sermon, God leads me in a zillion different directions. And for some reason, I'm looking into John Lennon this week. The Beatles. So I'm looking at the Beatles. And you remember, the Beatles in the 60s were like the biggest thing on this planet. Okay, they were just so huge. And John Lennon, 1966, he started a fire. John Lennon was being interviewed, and he said, "We're bigger than Jesus." 4 little words. We're bigger than Jesus, meaning the Beatles. Oh my goodness. So that year, record sales fell. That year, people were burning Beatles albums all over the place. You imagine, the heresy of burning Beatles albums. But they were doing that because of just those little words he had said. Sometimes the words we say, they make them so little. That's those 4 little words. Change things for them. I think he eventually got over that idea that they were bigger than Jesus. Obviously, nothing can be greater and bigger than Jesus. So, James is so clear, even though he seems to be giving us mixed messages about this tongue. I'm looking at the NRSV version, and he says about the tongue, the tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of his life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. Tell us how you really feel, right? He is serious. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers, this should not be. My brothers, this should not be. So, though it seems like there's a mixed message, no one can tame the tongue, he's also saying, this shouldn't be. He's saying, we still have to try. And who's we who still have to try? He's not talking to the wider world. He's talking about those folks who call themselves Christian believers. Those folks who have decided to follow the God understood in the life and the ministry, the death and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. He's talking to those folks. The ones who are following this expression of love who became human. Love who walked the earth on 2 feet. Those people is who he is talking to. And the message for us, then, is clear. We can't let our tongues run wild. Christians can't. You know, in the Gospels, Jesus had something to say too about the words we say. In fact, Jesus says, if you even think angry words or thoughts, let alone say them, that's akin to murder. Imagine that. The power of the tongue. John, Apostle John, he will tell us later in the gospel, anyone who says, I love God, but then badmouths a brother or sister is a liar and a murderer. I mean, these are kind of serious, harsh words. So, no. Christians, brothers and sisters, we must never speak death. We must never speak murder. Our speech must be life. It must point to life. So how do we do that? How do we do that? It's easier said than done. I mean, some folks can suddenly become enlightened. They can just have this Christian notion of perfection that just means like a spiritual cleansing, a spiritual inner awakening. So let God be the one who speaks through you, right? That's just going to be beautiful. You're going to start all kinds of fires of love and peace. Great. What if we can't do that? Well, I have this teacher that I've known for quite some time. She taught me the most helpful thing years and years ago. She said, when you're thinking of how to speak life, when you want to make sure you're speaking life, empowering words, just think before you speak. Instant thought was, that is so dumb. I mean, come on. Don't we all think before we speak most of the time? Most intelligent people do that. Think before you speak. She said, no. Think. Think. Before you open your mouth, Gail, she told me, she said, run through some things. Ask yourself, is what I'm about to say thoughtful? Is what I'm about to say honest? Is it intelligent? Are you with me? T-H-I. Is it intelligent? Is it necessary? Because some things could be all those, but maybe it's not really necessary. And is it kind? Is it thoughtful, honest, intelligent, necessary? And is it kind? For the bulk of the expression that we're going to do as Christian brothers and sisters in community, in our families, in our churches, think before you speak creates life. I think about the honest part. That one has been a challenge for me because sometimes, you could be very honest. It could be a very honest thing you want to say. And then you could say, well, yeah, I'm going to say that honest thing real kind. I'm going to be kind about how I say it. But then we think, well, is it necessary? Is it necessary? That can be just the thing sometimes where we can use the rudder to change course. Think before you speak. I want to close with the words of a song about speaking life. This is a song called Words. It's being played these days on K-Love Radio. And it goes a little something like this. Let my words be life. Let my words be truth. I don't want to say a word unless it points the world back to you. I don't want to say a word unless it points the world back to you. Think. Life. I think James would like that song. I think the brother of Jesus, if he could drive around Rockland, Loomis area, he would have Caleb radio cranking up. And he would say, let our words be life. Let them be truth. Let them point back to James's brother. That's the master. Practice makes perfect. Amen. I invite you now to stand as you're able and sing a joyful song of response, the wonderful words of life. And that is found on page, I'm always waiting for somebody to say it before I say 323. It's not found on page 133.